All right, let's dive right in. We're looking at a single piece of ancient linen, about 14 feet long, and for centuries it has ignited one of the most intense debates you can imagine, a debate that touches on faith, science, history, you name it. This is the Shroud of Turin, and we're about to investigate it, not as a religious icon, but as one of the most fascinating scientific cold cases of all time.
You know, Pope John Paul II once called the shroud a challenge to our intelligence. And that is the absolute perfect way to frame this. So let's just park any preconceived beliefs at the door. Our goal here is simply to follow the evidence, unpack the arguments, and just explore the sheer intellectual puzzle this thing presents.
So what are the basic facts that pretty much everyone agrees on? Well, it's a big linen cloth, and it's got this faint sepia image of a man, front and back, with wounds that look a lot like a crucifixion. For hundreds of years, that was pretty much it. But then, in 1898, the real scientific drama kicks off. A photographer named Secondo Pia takes the first ever picture of it, and when he's in the darkroom developing the glass plate negative, he's stunned because the image on the cloth was itself a negative. His photograph, the negative of a negative, revealed a positive image, showing this hauntingly detailed human figure for the very first time.
Now, for decades, it seemed like the scientific world had solved the mystery. And the verdict? The shroud was a brilliant fake, a medieval work of art. The evidence was so strong that for a lot of people, it completely closed the book on the whole thing. So how did they get there?
The 20th century saw science really zero in on this thing. After Pia's discovery, the next huge step was in 1978. A team of experts they called themselves STURP got incredible access to the cloth. They collected a ton of data, but they were totally stumped on how the image was even made. And then came the big one, what was supposed to be the definitive test. In 1988, samples were finally taken for radiocarbon dating.
And this wasn't some minor finding buried in a report somewhere. No, the results were published in Nature, one of the most prestigious scientific journals on the planet. And you have to look at the language they used. They didn't say it's likely or it suggests. They called it conclusive evidence. In the world of science, that is basically a mic drop. This was meant to be the final word.
And here it is, the date that seemingly solved the whole puzzle. 3 independent, world-class labs in Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona, they all came to the same conclusion. They dated the cloth to somewhere between 1260 and 1390. And it was a perfect match. Why? Because the shroud's first undisputed documented historical appearance was in a small town in France right in the 1350s.
So you see how neatly it all fit together, right? You had 2 really powerful lines of evidence pointing to the exact same conclusion. The world's gold standard dating method pointed to the Middle Ages, and the historical record confirmed the cloth popped up right on cue. The conclusion felt simple, satisfying. The shroud was a masterful piece of medieval art, not a 2,000-year-old relic. Case closed. But here's the thing about science. It's never really settled. In the decades since 1988, that conclusive evidence has been picked apart, re-examined, and seriously challenged. The case, as it turns out, was about to be blown wide open all over again. Let's look at how that rebuttal started to take shape.
So it took a few years, but eventually the raw data from those labs was released. And when statisticians started digging into the numbers, they found something troubling. That neat and tidy conclusion didn't really match the messy data underneath. Turns out the results from the 3 labs didn't totally agree with each other. In fact, some labs even got conflicting results from their own subsamples. And that is a huge red flag. It suggests the piece of cloth they were testing wasn't uniform.
So why wasn't the sample uniform? Well, it all comes down to where they took it from. The sample was cut from a single corner of the shroud, an area that was known to have been handled for centuries, and, this is critical, had been repaired by nuns after a big fire in 1532. Later, chemical analysis confirmed it. This corner had cotton fibers expertly interwoven with the original linen, and it had even been dyed, probably to blend the patch in. This led to an explosive new argument. What if they didn't date the shroud at all? What if they just dated a medieval repair patch? Okay, so even if you put the whole dating controversy aside for a second, you're still left with the image itself, which it defies every known process. It is unbelievably superficial. The image sits only on the very top microfibers of the linen. We're talking a fraction of the width of a human hair. And get this, where there are bloodstains, there is no image underneath. That means the blood had to be on the cloth before the image was formed. It even contains 3D information, where the shading actually encodes the distance from the body to the cloth. No medieval artist could have possibly done this, and frankly, no modern scientist today can fully replicate it either.
And then you've got completely different dating methods coming into play. In recent years, scientists have used these techniques with complicated names like wax, X-ray, and spectroscopy that act like a kind of molecular clock for the linen itself. Instead of measuring radioactive carbon, they analyze how the cloth's very structure has aged over time. A 2022 study, using one of these methods, found the shroud was a perfect match for a known first-century linen sample. Two other methods pointed to a similarly ancient origin, all of them flatly contradicting that 1988 carbon date.
Okay, so if the cloth is much older, where was it for more than 1,000 years before it just shows up in France? The official historical trail goes cold. Or doesn't. Some researchers believe the shroud carries its own hidden history, written right into its unique folds and stains.
Check this out. The shroud has this very specific, very odd pattern of diamond-shaped water stains. It turns out, there's really only one way you can create a pattern like that. You have to fold the cloth twice lengthwise, then fold it up like an accordion and store it vertically in some kind of pot or jar. If water seeps in from the bottom, it wicks its way up and creates these exact stains. Now, why does that matter? Because that points to a Middle Eastern storage method, not the flat chests they used in medieval Europe. It's like a physical fingerprint of the shroud's early life.
Using these physical clues, historians have pieced together a plausible, though still unproven, early history. The theory is that the shroud was actually the legendary image of Edessa, hidden for centuries. Then, around the 7th century, Byzantine art starts showing a Christ figure with facial features that are a stunning match for the man on the shroud. In 944, a famous relic, called the Mandilion, was brought to Constantinople. And maybe the most compelling clue of all is a Hungarian manuscript from around 1195 called the Pray Codex. It shows Jesus' burial, and it includes details unique to the shroud, its specific herringbone weave, and a very distinct L-shaped pattern of 4 burn holes. This is a drawing from 200 years before the carbon date says the cloth should even exist.
So now we have two completely different stories, and both seem to be backed by solid evidence. You have a definitive medieval radiocarbon date on one side, and a mountain of contradictory chemical, physical, and historical data on the other. How on earth do you weigh all of this?
This table really lays out the central conflict perfectly. The case for a medieval origin, it rests almost entirely on that 1988 carbon date and the fact that there's no perfect paper trail. But the case for an ancient origin is built on multiple, independent lines of evidence, the C14 data flaws, that impossible-to-replicate image, the historical breadcrumbs, the newer dating methods. So the real challenge is this. It's not just one piece of evidence against another. It's that single powerful carbon date versus a whole web of interlocking data from completely different fields.
So how do you solve a puzzle like this? Well, some researchers are turning to a really powerful statistical tool called Bayesian analysis. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's a mathematical way to update how strongly you believe something as new evidence comes in. Think of it like a detective's logic, but with numbers.
Okay, let's run a quick thought experiment. Imagine you start out completely neutral, totally on the fence, a 50-50 shot. It's either medieval or it's ancient. Then you start plugging in all the evidence we've just talked about, the problems with the C14 test, the weird properties of the image, those historical clues. Where does that 50-50 needle move?
According to one academic study that ran this exact analysis, the probability that the shroud is ancient jumps all the way to 99%.
Now, let's be crystal clear about this. This number does not prove the shroud is authentic. It's a statistical model, that's all. But what it demonstrates is that the case against the medieval date isn't just a few minor complaints. When you combine all of these independent lines of evidence, their collective weight becomes scientifically and statistically massive. It shows that the scientific rebuttal is far stronger than the original conclusive verdict ever was.
And so, we're left right back where we started, but with a much deeper appreciation for the mystery. After more than a century of our best science being thrown at it, the shroud remains a profound challenge. Is it the world's most clever forgery, a masterpiece created with some lost medieval technology? Or is it something else entirely? A genuine, 2,000-year-old artifact with properties that still lie beyond the edge of our scientific understanding? For now, this cold case remains wide open.